In the Vatican, it's a breach of the pontifical secret to say you wrote something to which your name was not there. I just had one little thing, and you mentioned my relations with the Church of Ireland and the Presbyterian Church. I would mention also the Methodist Church, particularly as Dr. Ian Henderson is from this part of the world, and it was again extremely thoughtful personally to me, which is something I'd like to put on record. Some months ago, a commentator on radio said he didn't understand the Archbishop of Dublin. So the Archbishop of Dublin speaks out of both sides of his mouth, and you don't really know what he thinks. On the one hand, I'd said that the Catholic Church in Ireland was at a crisis point, and on the other hand, I had said in the same week that it had begun to turn the corner of renewal. I don't see these as opposing comments. I believe that both reflect different aspects of the life of the Church today. The problem is that many who see the Catholic Church as being in crisis fail to see, or do not want to see, that the Church already is turning the corner to a renewed phase in its history. And those who feel that we've turned the corner very often say we've definitively turned the corner, so now it's time to look forward with confidence and definitively to forget and to archive the past. I spoke here a few years ago on the subject of the Church in Ireland, the situation of the Church in Ireland. I can honestly say that I found my task in preparing for this evening much more difficult to analyse the situation of the Church in Ireland. There's no way in which I can make definitive statements. There's no way in which I can humanly say that the future is optimistic or pessimistic in the short term. Only my faith that Jesus will be with his Church gives me encouragement and light. On a human level, I would say there are more unknowns, more challenges, and also more dysfunctionalities than there were a few years ago. I'm not by nature a pessimist. I recognise the remarkable changes that have taken place in the Irish Church since Vatican II. It's only 50 years ago, but also changes that have taken in the more recent years and months. But there are many contradictions and level of ambivalence. This is a phrase I'll come back to once or twice. Contradictions and levels of ambivalence in the way both believers and non-believers look at and evaluate the Church and its role in Ireland today. Let me give one first example. Priests in Ireland have experienced a very difficult time in recent years, not because of the effects on them of the trauma of scandals regarding the sexual abuse of children by priests, but because of the changing culture in which the role of the priest in society and the identity of the priest has changed. Priests are challenged to live their ministry in a culture in which their self-understanding today is radically different to that of the time they became priests. Priests are being challenged in their work, and they feel they're not receiving the formation and the support they need to face the cultural and organisational aspects of the challenge of change. On the other hand, I believe that if surveys were only to ask the right questions, they might well find that trust and confidence and appreciation for good, hard-working local priests in Ireland has, if anything, increased in recent years, as has the affection and the support which priests receive from their congregations. Priests need to have that fact recognised and affirmed. They hear it and experience it every day from those with whom they work. They need to hear about it in public comment and in the media. They need to hear about it from their bishops and their superiors. Being a priest today is following a lonely and unsettling furrow. But the vast majority of priests know that they have the human and spiritual resources to face those realities. And if any group has faced and existentially lived through the crisis that the Church is experiencing in Ireland and have led the path to turning the corner of renewal, it is priests. One of the challenges that we have to face in Ireland today is to face the challenge of vocations to the priesthood. Why is it that numbers entering the seminaries are low? Is the Church reaching out in the right direction? Now, it's not my intention to enter into the discussions about the ordination of women or the introduction of married priests. I want to talk about the challenges that we face in the realities of the real life of the church as it is today. We have married deacons in Dublin. We have now committed, qualified, dedicated lay women and men in various pastoral and administrative services. We have new structures in which parishes come together with teams formed of priests, deacons and lay women and men working together to provide pastoral care. But we need priests. And it's not just that the number of candidates is low. It's also that many of those who present are fragile. Some are much more traditional than those who went before them. Now, I have no problem with priests or seminarians who come from a solid, theologically based traditional faith background. If anything, I would have greater anxieties regarding priests or candidates who simply go with the trends of the day and lack a real spiritual and theological anchor. There is, however, a danger that superficial attachment to the externals of tradition may well be a sign of fearfulness and flight from changed realities, and that is exactly what we do not need. We come in Ireland from a very traditional church, and there are many signs that the traditional rigid church of more recent times, that some look back to with approval, may not have been really what it appeared. The seminary I entered just 1 week before the opening of Vatican II differed very little to the seminary in its rule and order of the day from that into which my professors had entered 20 or 30 years earlier. Indeed, more than one of my professors had no difficulty then in using for his lectures the theological notes which he had prepared 10 or 20 years earlier. Yet at that time theology was changing. The changes of Vatican II came to an Ireland which was perhaps too little conversant with the theological and liturgical developments that had been taking place in Europe and which were at the basis of the Vatican II and its theology. It was very clear, however, that those static Latin textbooks were not the way to respond to the change that was taking place in the Word. My lectures on moral theology, on justice, dealt with abstract questions which could easily have been asked 100 years earlier. And the responses that were given to what was becoming a changing world were defined almost in simplistic, static questions and answer formulae. The seminarian was to be given safe guidelines and clear-cut answers to a challenge of a changing world, and that no longer responded to changing times. There was a real desire within the Irish Church to adopt and apply the changes expressed by Vatican II. But sometimes we tend to evaluate those changes and the results of Vatican II excessively in terms of what changed and where do we feel there's something more to be done. We may have failed to read that Vatican II was not simply a council which fostered change and things new. It didn't set out to create a new church. If anything, it was a council which brought us backwards. It brought us back beyond what we experienced then in our youth and in our education, back to a deeper understanding of the faith of the church, which was rooted in the scriptures and in the rich traditions of the church. Change did take place, and the pace of change in church and society was such as to challenge fundamental assumptions. Change is always difficult to live with and to manage, and the rigid culture of the pre-conciliar days, the immediate pre-conciliar days of the Irish Church, did not provide us with adequate norms of discernment adapted to the new situation. One of the challenges we still have to face when we talk about turning the corner of renewal is that you'd be tempted to think that turning the corner was something definitive. Some would think it means returning to a safe and well-known environment of the past. Others would think it's opening the pathway to a new, modern, safe, well-lit motorway. But in today's cultural change, turning the corner will never be an end product. The life of the believer, the life of the church, is about a faith journey on which we encounter never-ending corners to challenge us. And we're called to adapt and respond to new situations through a profound insight into the teaching of Jesus Christ. A profound insight which will enable us and the church to rediscover ever deeper our own identity as Christians, and then to mediate that message in a world of change. Turning the corner of renewal, therefore, means taking risk, taking the risk of a faith which always entails elements of the unknown. And turning the corner, moving forward, doesn't mean turning one's back on the past. There's no way in which the Church in Ireland can put definitively behind it the scandals of the sexual abuse of vulnerable children by priests and religious. Now, this does not mean that the Church becomes pathologically fixated on a dark moment of its history. Neither does it mean that the Church overlooks the realities of the past and the suffering, past and present, of victims and survivors. Despite many investigations, I believe that we as a church and society still have to reflect more deeply on the real roots of the abuse crisis and the response to it by the church. I do not accept that it's enough to say it happened in different times and people reacted as best they could in the context of the day, not attempting to criticize the decisions of individuals or challenge their good faith. That's not my task, and I'm not the one to judge. It's been said to me, even by fellow bishops, that I would have acted in the same way as they did. I cannot say that I would not have done. That doesn't mean that we abandon the search to deepen our understanding of what happened. In the Archdiocese of Dublin, we have looked at our figures, which show that 84% of the allegations that the diocese received in a period of about 60 years took place in one period, between the mid-1960s and the mid-1980s. The numbers of allegations related to successive years has greatly gone down. We have still to try and understand what happened to produce such an explosion of abuse at a particular time, and how such a horrendous situation was not recognised for what it was. This attempt at understanding obviously must look at the responsibility of everyone, of all our society. But there is a special responsibility to ask deep and uncomfortable questions as to why this happened in the Church of Jesus Christ. The truth can be painful, but I believe we have a long journey to fully fathom the truth, to accept the truth, and to internalise the truth about what happened within the Church in Ireland at a particular time. In today's economic climate, there's understandably no great interest in establishing new and costly investigations into further aspects of the abuse scandal, even though, as is well known, I believe that there are some instances where the public interest would be served by public investigation, and the answers to some of the questions are to be found not just in the archives of the Church. And even if no further commissions are likely, this doesn't mean that men and women of courage and conviction shouldn't continue to seek other ways to shed the light of discernment and how the presence of the Church in serving the most deprived went wrong, and allow the truth to emerge. The fact that thousands of children were abused within the Church of Jesus Christ in Ireland is a scar that the Church will bear within it for generations to come, and there's no way we can put that aside. And I'm not thinking here just of the known scandals of industrial schools and the abuse of children by priests. There are further questions still to be answered. And I believe that perhaps new forms of research-based investigation might better address such issues as the Magdalene laundries, the quality of care in some mother and baby homes, and other institutions. It would be a less adversarial method, somewhat on the level of investigative social history, through which the truth could emerge. And I believe that there will be some who would say that would simply instrumentalise to people to damage the Church. But I believe that if abuse did take place, we owe it to the victims and we owe it to the Church to bring the truth to light and to foster repentance in a way that's honest and compassionate. And indeed, seeking the truth will also help to put aside any false or exaggerated or unsubstantiated allegations against the Church. The truth can be used to throw mud at the Church. The truth can also be the sharpest instrument to discern and root out demons which have haunted the Church now for generations and will continue to damage the Church unless they're addressed with courage. There is no way in which the Church should allow itself to be tempted to simply archive the past out of the light. But that shouldn't lead to paralysis and resignation on the path of renewal. The scandals within the church, our internal divisions, and perhaps a lack of real faith, have made the church today too timid in bringing the voice of Jesus and his church to the basic issues of Irish society. We are all tempted to succumb to the widespread opinion that Christianity is really something private and personal for our own devotion and inspiration, and not something that has relevance in the public square. The church in Ireland has to find ways to make its voice heard clearly about important moral and social issues which are under discussion. It must do so with respect, but with clarity. It must find a new language, and I would say a language of dialogue rather than diktat, of dialogue rather than decree. But I'd also say that Irish secular society has to go along the road of dialogue and not anathema and exclusion of the voice of religion. Religion has contributed to, continues to contribute to, and will contribute to Irish society, as it does to any other society in the world. It's not that religion must become the poor relation in a changed and more secularized society. A pluralist society, as any other society in history, benefits from the presence of religion. We can see that change, and again the ambivalences that are present in the current debate about schools. In few other aspects of current debate do we witness these contradictions and level of ambivalence. On the one hand, there are those who would say that the pluralism of our society requires that the role of religion in education be radically redimensioned and even reduced to the private sphere. I believe that we have nothing to be ashamed of in fostering Catholic and denominational education, and that denominational education brings a specific and vital reflection to education policy in general. It's true, of course, that people should not be forced to attend denominational schools or take part in religious practices in schools. But on the other hand, alongside this view that religion should be redimensioned, there's strong indications that Irish parents favour in large numbers a system of education which includes a robust dimension of religious education. There's a strong move to reduce the number of schools under church control, and I respect and share that view. But the demand for religious education is likely to remain in the foreseeable future. And thus there's a responsibility, I'd say even an obligation, for the state to respond to and support that desire of parents. It means that there should be sufficient schools to respond to those parents who wish religious education for their children. It also means that future teachers of religion in such schools, teaching part of the curriculum of state schools, should have access to and public funding for the training they need. The question of belief and the relationship between faith and reason is one of the perennial questions in any society and at any time. It's a question that any serious reflection on the meaning of life has to address. The deeper questions are not answered by believers who simply presume faith when it may not be there, or who attribute bad faith to those who don't believe, or indeed on the more secular side by those who simply reject faith as a non-question, a question not to be asked, a question to be put aside. Recognising the changed cultural climate in Ireland doesn't mean that the Church simply accepts all dimensions of that change as inevitable. It's not the case that the Church should simply take a bow and leave society for good. The Church has positions which it has a right to express on the many issues of social change in Ireland. In a democratic society, men and women of faith have the same rights as others to make their views known. Take questions of the family. The family in Ireland is still strong compared to other parts of Western Europe. And the Church, in its counselling and education services, has always given a lead in strengthening the family. But marriage is not a simple social construct which can be changed at will. Certainly, there are changes in the way marriages are lived out and family are lived out in any time. For the Church, there is something unique in the complementarity of man and woman in the human situation. And for the Church, lifelong commitment is an essential understanding and dimension of its understanding of marriage. The concept of lifelong commitment and fidelity are hard to understand in today's culture, but most young people who come for marriage in the Church have a genuine hope that their marriage will be successful and that it will develop and mature with the passage of time and last. For too long, however, the Church has appeared in a role of moralization and has failed perhaps to transmit the real depth of the Christian message, which is about Jesus Christ as a person who in his life and teaching reveals to us who God is, a God who is love and with whom we can enter into a personal relationship which brings richness and hope into people's lives. When I say that the Church has to be more forceful in making its voice heard and understood in Irish society, I'm not just talking about issues like marriage and the family, about education, about the protection of human life from conception until natural death. These are central issues on which the Church will always teach. But there are other important issues in Irish society which the Church should also be addressing and has not been doing so. Pope Benedict, in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est, wrote at length and in surprising ways about the separate roles of Church and State. He said, "The Church cannot and must not take upon herself the political battle to bring about the most just society possible. She cannot and must not replace the State. Yet at the same time, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines. She has to play her part through rational argument, and she has to reawaken spiritual energy, without which justice, which demands sacrifice, cannot prevail and prosper." Very clear and unusual understanding of the relationship between Church and State. So I believe the Church has to find new ways of speaking about and bringing to the forefront in public discussion those spiritual energies about which the Pope spoke, and also indicate where those spiritual energies are missing and when they have been betrayed. The complexities of a modern economy and the diverse ways in which these may be legitimately pursued make comments by the Church on economic matters more difficult and problematic today. But there are questions about poverty and equity, about privilege and underprivilege, about opportunity and exclusion, about simple honesty, about greed, about corruption, and also about generous commitment in society, which the Church should have been addressing more coherently in the context of the Irish economy. Perhaps it's because the Church has for so long, especially in recent history, played a dominant role in Irish society, that much of the public discussion about the future of the Catholic Church in Ireland is about its presence in society. What are the internal challenges that the Church has to face? The Church faces again new challenges which touch on its self-understanding and identity. And once again, the current debate shows that there are contradictions and ambivalences in the way we look at it. There's real ambiguity about what being Catholic means in contemporary society. Many no longer regularly practice, but will still come to church on special occasions, on great feasts. There's a sort of cultural Catholicism. There's also what I kind a type of Catholicism, or what people would call Catholicism, which is a civil religion, a social spirituality without dogma, with just a blurred reference to a Jesus of one's own creation. And then there are appeals for a type of deinstitutionalization of the Church. There's those who wish an Irish Church separate from Rome. There are those who would speak rightly of strengthening the role of lay people, but really want a church without office and order, and that would be in which they'd be radically emptied of their theological meaning. One can talk about how office is exercised, and rightly so, but office, including the office of the successor of Peter, is an essential pillar of Catholic teaching. Then we have internal divisions in our church. I said recently that a bickering church will not attract young people, and that many of our internal discussions with the church are about realities which seem to our young people totally irrelevant to the world in which they live. When I said bickering, I was talking about negative, destructive discussion. We do, however, need robust discussion, deepening our understanding of the real and central essentials of the truth. That discussion must be theologically informed, and theology is a demanding discipline, but a church which is not ours to define, but one which is a gift from Jesus Christ. The Catholic Church in Ireland has, in fact, been far behind other European churches in addressing the way it addresses the formation of people in their faith. The emphasis on religious education in schools has taken attention away from the need for adult religious education. And when I say adult religious education, I'm not talking about religious education for adults as another category, young or old. I mean that the quality of religious education must be of such a level that it treats men and women as adults, addressing the questions which adult Christians have to face as they live their faith in the Word. And one of the striking features of the Eucharistic Congress was the fact that the workshops, many of very high calibre, were filled to overflowing, and we had to repeat them twice or three times. And I see there a clear felt need among Irish Catholics for adult formation to an adult faith. We have an excellent directory of catechesis, Share the Good News. It was launched some years ago, but its application has been very slow, and it's not really making inroads into popular catechetics and into parish life as it should do. The Irish Church is very slow to change, and our structures have a certain dysfunctionality in them. And we need to pay more attention to the training of priests and deacons for their ministry to preach the Word of God, to adults in an adult context. The Eucharistic Congress was, for me, an event of significance. Mine were never the expectations of a reenactment of 1932. I had no intention of building a round tower in College Green, as was done in 1932. I didn't expect the numbers to be extraordinary, and I said that. Daily attendance at some events was below the attendance at county GAA matches, and maybe regional GAA matches would probably have higher attendance, as you know. Croke Park was not filled for the final Mass, but I believe the Congress was a success. There was an extraordinary atmosphere of enthusiasm in the main hall and right throughout the RDS. And another lesson we have to learn, all of us, is we need moments to build up our own spirit as disciples of Jesus Christ, and to renew our self-confidence as the Church of Jesus Christ. And the Congress, the coming together of people from around the world, brought a sense of affirmation, and this is something the Church needs. As Patsy said, the level of ecumenical participation at the Eucharistic Congress was quite unique, especially on the day when we celebrated our common baptism, presided over by a Church of Ireland bishop, with a homily of a Russian Orthodox metropolitan. That ecumenical collaboration would have been unheard of not so long ago. And the churches in Ireland together know that new evangelization is not a task for the Catholic Church or an individual denomination alone. At the youth space in the Congress, it reached across the confessional divides. There was a remarkable evening of prayer with the Prior of Taizé, who came to Dublin especially for the Congress, and it showed there is a great search for faith in our young people. The biggest single challenge that the Church in Ireland has to face is to rediscover its ability to lead young people into an adult faith and into a commitment not just to want to belong to the Church, but to want to shape the Church, to shape a Church which provides them ways of seeking into the deeper realities about what human existence is about. And our work in religious education in schools, despite the dedication of those involved, will never on its own produce the results we need today. We need an ability to allow the gospel to reach out into the real lives of young men and women as a challenge that is courageous and is counter-cultural. I said at the beginning that I spoke here some years ago on the situation of the Church in Ireland, and that I could honestly say that my task in preparing for today to analyse the Church in Ireland was much more difficult than it was then. That's the situation in which we find ourselves. It's the situation in which I find myself as the bishop of the largest diocese in Ireland. But all I can say is I find it a challenging position to be bishop at this time in the Church's history. And as my years pass, Patsy revealed my age, and as I watch all my contemporaries in other walks of life enjoying happy retirement, I realize that the urgency of engaging the minds and hearts of young people, willing themselves to take up the challenge of turning the corner of renewal, is a very difficult and a very challenging situation for a very different future. But despite the challenges, I believe it can be done. I thank you.